When fueled by the bravado of youth, I had no qualms about approaching young ladies on the dance floors of what were then called discotheques. If I got lucky, I might have enjoyed a spin with a stranger to the strains of I Feel Love by Donna Summer or Heaven Must Be Missing an Angel by Tavares, under the glare of a UV light that made the dandruff on my shoulders glow. If it wasn't to be my night, I'd walk home alone, carrying enough cold shoulder to cater the last night of the proms. But I wasn't deterred. I'd be back the following weekend, as eager and thick-skinned as ever. As time rumbled on relentlessly, though, I watched, as we all do, the fleeting joy of youth diminish in life's rearview mirror, and 4 decades have passed since those days. Following 2 failed marriages and a string of relationships, the cooking time of which ranged from flash fry to slow roast, I found myself single as I turned 60. This is a whole different cauldron of cod to those carefree days of my youth, not only because body and mind aren't what they once were, but also because I know nothing of the protocols of senior dating. Little did I know the cogs and gears of fate were turning in a manner that would see me thrust headlong into a new relationship right out of the blue. One afternoon, about a year after my return to the Singleton fold, I was at a bottle bank in the car park at a local shopping mall. The previous day, some friends had visited my apartment to watch football on TV, and a dozen beer bottles stood on the kitchen table. I bagged the empties, braved the clink of shame as I passed neighbours on the stairs, and drove to the bottle bank. As I began pushing bottles through the designated hole, a lady, whose age I guessed to be about 50, started transferring wine bottles from a bag for life into a hole further along. Always one for a quip, I made a comment. "Isn't it amazing how quickly these sauce bottles and pickle jars mount up?" I said, shoving another lager bottle into the hole. The stranger laughed, and, following that killer icebreaker, we entered into a cheerful conversation. But there was very little sand in the hourglass, and I was soon down to my last 2 bottles. I had to act fast, so in a demonstration of decisiveness I'd not shown since my youth, I overrode my misgivings and suggested we continue the chat elsewhere. She was folding her now empty bag, so I went all in. "Would you care to join me for coffee?" I said, drawing the final bottle from my bag. Such was my haste, I used the bottle to point towards a large pub across the road. Unfortunately, the last of the dead men wasn't quite empty, and I slung the dregs right into her face. And I mean bullseye. As she spluttered and spat, I quickly moved to offer my sleeve as a towel, but she pushed me away. There followed the most contrite apology ever to fall upon a human ear. As she dried her eyes with a tissue pulled from a pocket, she laughed. "Come on then, lager out," she said, to my astonishment. "Lead on." We went into the bar, and I bought us a coffee each. My new friend introduced herself as Camomile McSween. When I commented on her unusual but rather sweet first name, she told me that her parents, hippies with a liking for herbal teas, had chosen it for its rhythm and how its 3 syllables are a perfect prelude to the 2 in her surname. In fact, she went on, so pleased were Mr. and Mrs. McS with their efforts on the child-naming front, when a son came along 2 years after Camomile, they stuck to the same formula and named him Camembert in honour of the classic Gong album Camembert Electrique. Her brother carried that name until he was 11 when he shortened it to Bird. But the damage had been done, Camomile said, and his friends still call him Cheesy to this day. Camomile, who goes by the name Cammy, is 56 and single. Her long-term partner died 8 years ago, and she told me that she's been on her own for the past 2 years, during which time she has enjoyed very little social activity, hence the wine bottles. On first impressions, my new friend seemed a thoroughly decent old stick, about 5'6", slim build with uniform light grey hair. She's well-spoken, smartly dressed, and wears makeup even while on bottle bank detail. On the downside, she is a smoker, but her positive attributes easily outweigh that. We hit it off so well that by the time we parted, we had exchanged phone numbers and penciled in plans for a weekend of shared activities. Our itinerary included a trip to the cinema on Friday, the zoo on Saturday, and Sunday lunch at my local pub, the Boathouse. I got home feeling quite excited at what had been a most pleasant and unexpected development. But later, over a thoughtful cup of tea, concerns crept into my consciousness, one of which caused me some unease. Now, I expect you will assume that my big worry relates to activities that go on under the duvet, and I'd be fretting over which would creak louder, the bed springs or my hip. But no. My anxiety is that I'm well out of practice in the art of kissing, and, of more concern, I've never once engaged in that activity while wearing my recently acquired partial upper denture. I wondered how it would perform under the stress and movement of vigorous osculation were such an event to occur. I didn't even know if couples our age actually kiss. It had been so long since I was on a date. I'd soon find out. On Friday evening, I met Cammy at the cinema doors. As I paid for tickets, I became aware of an issue that needed addressing. My apprehension of kissing while wearing false teeth had been such I'd applied an over-generous blob of fixative to the palate of the denture, which had since oozed out onto my upper gum and the roof of my mouth. I didn't want to be poking about with my fingers, as that would give the denture game away, but I had a brainwave right there in the foyer. I bought a bag of chocolate caramels, which are as far removed from denture-friendly as The Exorcist is from family viewing. But there was a method to my madness. The plan was to pretend to put one of the sweets into my mouth, then, under the guise of tackling the toffee, I could scrape off the residual adhesive with my tongue and swallow it, hopefully before any kissing had begun, if it ever would. We took our seats in the auditorium, and I offered Cammy a caramel, which she declined. I unwrapped one of the chocolates and dropped it onto the floor while pretending to put it in my mouth. Free to indulge in as much jaw movement as I liked, I scraped a globule of glue from my gum with my tongue. Another blob had attached itself to the roof of my mouth at the back, beyond the reach of my tongue, but not so far back that I could swallow it. As I struggled to reach the errant blob, Cammy suddenly leaned over, planted her lips on mine, and gave me a cinema snog, the like of which I'd not experienced since my hair had colour. It was a kiss so French I thought I heard accordion music above the slurping. When we separated to take in air, I noticed with some alarm that the lump of fixative was no longer attached to the roof of my mouth. I knew I hadn't swallowed it, so I probed my gums and cheeks with my tongue in search of the absconding adhesive. Then, to my horror, in my peripheral vision I saw Cammy spitting something into a paper tissue, which I assumed she thought was part of a chocolate caramel. There was a lot of gunfire on the screen at that moment, and I had hoped a stray bullet would take me out, such was my discomfiture. Our lips never touched again during the film. When I got home later that night, I plopped my denture into a glass of water and ate half of the bag of chocolate caramels. When I met Cammy at the zoo on Saturday afternoon, I'd already had lunch, so I could turn down any offers of food that might give my secret away. Of course, I knew that if our relationship developed into something serious, it would be impossible for me to keep up the dental deception. As things were, though, I'd rather wait until we were more at ease with each other before revealing my big secret. We walked a circuit of the zoo, during which I photographed a flamingo, snapped a snake, and, in a photographic sense, shot a Shetland pony. On our way to the exit, we came to a camel enclosure, and one of the beasts was kitted out in a large red fez. Cammy insisted I take a photo. The ugly ungulate stood behind a fence, and Cammy positioned herself in front of it. I stepped back to get the fez in the shot, and just as I took the photo, a catastrophe played out right in front of my eyes. The camera-shy camel lunged at Cammy with its snout, shoving her right between the shoulders, causing her to fall forward with some force. As she hit the ground, a zookeeper and I immediately went to her aid, the former issuing repeated apologies to Cammy and crude chastisement to the camel. As we lifted Cammy back to an upright position, I spotted a full upper denture on the ground that was clearly too small to have been spat out by the camel. I looked towards the likely owner of the denture, who was shaken but unhurt after her fall, but in some distress due to the absence of one half of her chewing tackle. "Well, you could have knocked me down with a toothbrush. After all the trouble I'd taken to keep my dental deficiency a secret, Cammy had been doing the same all along." I picked up the denture, and Cammy held out her hand, inviting me to give it to her. "Please," she said, holding the other hand to her mouth as she spoke. I handed it over, and she hurried to a toilet block to wash the denture before reinserting. 5 minutes later, Cammy returned with her smile restored and a fresh application of lipstick, as good as new, although there was a tear in the knee of her trousers. She said she'd had enough of the zoo for one day and suggested coffee. As we sat in a cafe, I decided that recent developments had laid the ground for me to get everything off my chest and admit to my own dental shortcomings. "If it makes you feel any better," I said, "I wear a denture." "I know," she said. I was taken aback, as Warner, my dentist, had told me he was delighted with the match of the denture and my remaining teeth. "How could you tell?" I said. She laughed softly. "I got a blob of denture adhesive in my mouth when we kissed at the cinema last night." "Looks like rain," I said, changing the subject. At home that evening, I watched TV alone and finished the bag of chocolate caramels. When an ad break came on, I picked up my phone to view the photos from the zoo. I didn't get any further than the last shot I'd taken, because, blow me, if it wasn't the most hilarious image ever to fall under the gaze of a human eye. I donned my reading glasses for a more detailed study of what was a truly remarkable sight. I had snapped Cammy at the very moment the camel had shoved her in the back, and, oh my, in the words of the old song, what a picture. I shall endeavour to relay the image via words, but it won't come close to the real thing. While lacquer held Cammy's hair firmly in place, the sudden jolt had caused her face to take on the most grotesque grimace. Her eyes bulged like golf balls, and each looked in a different direction. Her wide-open mouth, minus upper teeth, was a gaping hole that would give Munch's most famous work a run for its money. The detached denture had completed its exit and, while in mid-flight, was perfectly level and closer to the camera, giving the impression of a moustache made of teeth. What made the image even more hilarious was that the fez-wearing camel had just pulled its head back after contact. Its huge face was directly above Cammy, and the beast appeared to be grinning. I laughed at the photo right through the ad break and beyond. For the rest of the night I picked up the phone sporadically to view the irresistible image, and each time I chuckled anew. It was priceless. In bed I allowed myself one final peek at the photo before sleep. I laughed so heartily I caused the bed springs to creak for the first time in a long time. The boathouse is about as traditional an English pub as you could find. It stands by a busy canal, and I've whiled away many a sunny afternoon in the beer garden there, watching passing narrowboats. Getting from my home to the pub is a mere 10-minute walk along a towpath, but the fine autumnal weather that morning was perfect for walking, so I took Cammy on an hour-long stroll, meandering through woodland before doubling back onto the towpath and into the lounge of the pub. After getting a pint of bitter for myself and a white wine for Cammy, I led her to a table where several of my friends were seated. I introduced my new girlfriend to Old Harry, Stan, Foxy, and Roger and Alice Silvermane. I was delighted that Cammy made a favourable impression with her smart attire and pleasant, well-spoken manner. About halfway through my second pint, I suggested to Cammy that we order food, as the combination of the long walk and beer had given me a keen appetite. She said she needed the toilet, adding that she'd go outside for a cigarette while about it, and we could order food on her return. After Cammy left, I gave in to a devilish impulse I have since reflected upon with a sense of shame. "Here," I said, "have a quick look at this." I slid my phone into the centre of the table with the camel photo on display. Mrs. S. didn't find the image amusing, but the boys roared with laughter. Harry dried an eye on the cuff of his jumper, and Foxy repeatedly slapped the table as the phone slid from one to another. And then the riotous scene petered out rather quickly, like boiling milk when the pan is removed from the heat. I guessed what had caused the cessation. "I forgot my lighter," Cammy said. I reached for the phone and pulled it towards me, trying to hide the image with my hand, but I was too late. "Let me see," Cammy said. I expelled a nervous cough and gave her the phone. She looked at the image without reacting and, epitomizing the phrase calm and collected, gave it back to me. "Delete," she said. I immediately complied. Satisfied the image had been destroyed, and accepting my assurance that I hadn't sent it on to anyone or made copies, Cammy picked up her lighter and the glass of wine. She took a sip from the latter, flung the remaining contents at my face with some force, and then walked simultaneously out of the bar and my life. I rubbed my stinging eyes, and, with wine dripping from my nose onto the table, it wasn't lost on me that my brief affair with Cammy had ended exactly as it had begun, with one of us getting sloshed in the face. It was almost poetic.